We recently asked a couple hundred of you emerging biotech leaders about your go-to sources of information when you face tough professional challenges. Your top response wasn't webinars, it wasn't scientific journals, it wasn't trade shows, it wasn't even consultants. Far and away, you said you most often turn to your peers for trusted insight. Enabling a community of peers is what the Business of Biotech podcast is all about. It's also what our new Business of Biotech newsletter is all about. Peer-driven content, no strings attached, delivered to your inbox once a month. Go to bioprocessonline.com/BOB to subscribe. The Business of Biotech is produced by Bioprocess Online, part of the Life Science Connect community, with support from Cytiva. Cytiva also demonstrates its commitment to the leaders of new and emerging biopharma at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. In just 20 years, Nawal Ouzren has built a resume that few achieve in an entire career. After earning a couple of master's degrees in chemical engineering, she launched into management with GE as an operations management leadership program trainee and Six Sigma black belt. Then it was on to Baxter, where over the course of 8 years, she rose to vice president of the biosimilars business unit there. And in 2014, she became a VP and hemophilia franchise head at Baxalta, then group VP for rare genetic disease at Shire. In 2017, she made a big leap to become CEO and director at Sensorion, a clinical stage biopharma focused on finding solutions to hearing loss and backing up that focus with a deep pipeline of multimodal candidates. I'm Matt Pillar, and on today's episode of the Business of Biotech, we're going to get to know Nawal and learn about Sensorion's bold attempts to address indications that impact millions, if not billions, of people worldwide. Nawal, welcome to the show.
Very nice to see you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Super nice to see you too, and thanks for joining us. We're honored, and as I like to do with guests, I want to get to know you a little bit before we jump into the Sensorion story. And as I mentioned in this intro, you had some pretty notable big pharma experience, right? And I always ask my guests who jump away from big pharma into emerging biopharma, you know, what sort of motivates that move? Because big pharma can be a pretty comfortable space where you can spend an entire career. What motivated you to take that leap and jump into clinical stage Sensorion?
It's true, and you know that how comfortable it is once you left actually the big pharma environment and you jump into the biotech world. I would say that taste for biotech came during my biosimilar franchise head role. When I started this role, actually, Baxter at that point, after a strategic process, they decided to create two new franchises, one in oncology and one in biosimilar. And they just asked me, like, why don't you just take over and start this new franchise? So it's a little bit like starting a new company, but within the safe harbor of a big organization. So we completed, some deals, some business deals with some biotechs, one in Cambridge, actually Boston, and the other one in San Diego. And this really gave me the taste for biotech, because I remember when we did the due diligence and we worked with these guys, I was so impressed by the speed of innovation and how fierce they were. And I always felt like, have this mental note, like one day I'll join biotech. I want to be part of that environment where they're trying to somewhat change the world and do things really risky at the fast pace.
Yeah, very cool. I also made note of the fact that you were a black belt at GE and Baxter. And I don't know, there's a good chance that other CEOs and leaders of biotechs that I've talked to have achieved that accreditation. But I don't know that we've ever had a discussion about what it means and how it's applied. So I wanted to dig in there just a little bit and learn about what that role looks like in a biopharma setting and how it perhaps has contributed to your career and your leadership.
Actually, it's very interesting that you highlighted this, because although it was very early on in my career, but that was pretty foundational, as you said, the person I became, throughout my career. So what is Six Sigma? So it's a statistical project management methodology. It was, I would say, marketed and really under the leadership of Jack Welch when he was running GE, and GE was really focused on taking costs out, and they deployed the Six Sigma approach. And at that point, as you said, people that were highlighted as top talent, they were trained as green belt and then as black belt, and you were responsible for very strategic projects for the organization. So apart from the technical side of and the statistical tools, I think what really it taught me was the ability to ask questions, very relevant questions, because Six Sigma, at the end of the day, you're trying to solve a problem, but in a very deliberate manner, and not just jumping to solutions when you haven't even defined very well the problem. And, sometimes I'm like, some people just come and they say, we have a problem with this. And then I'll say, what makes you say that? So I would like to pressure test like the data, the information that make them believe, we have an issue. And then I pressure test the robustness of the data. And then once we know we have a problem, I'm like, okay, how can we actually solve it? So we move into the analyze and driving actually the conversation in that time frame with that methodology, as you said, make you trigger some thinking within the table that is somewhat, it's not innovative, but it's I would say very deliberate, very systematic, and it makes people really think about it in a systematic manner and find the right solution to the problems you're trying to solve. Or sometimes to even better define the problem, because you're believing you're having a problem here, but actually it's there. So let's not focus on here. It's like the symptoms and the root cause of the disease. So that's what a black belt means. A black belt means is like you reach that level of mastery of the methodology that you can coach actually people who are running programs, using the methodology. You can be their coach. You can make sure, that they're following the right path.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can see where like over the course of your career, when you were working on perhaps a specific discipline or on a specific modality or project, you would apply that skill and that learning within that project. Now, as director and CEO at Sensorion, do you find yourself kind of exercising those black belt muscles across a broader swath of your responsibilities, like
every hour?
Yeah.
It is so true, because as a CEO, as you said, you're responsible, I would say, for everything, but you don't have the expertise for everything. Far from that. And what you need to do is make sure you're building a team around you of people who have the expertise. But what you also would like to do is like make sure that first you understand, what's happening. And as I said, always try to ask the question. It's not, for me, the CEO should not be the one who actually brings the answer. It's actually the ones that are making sure we're asking the right questions. That when he said this is the right thing to do, we really pressure tested all the pathways. And then we move ahead in a full speed, but we did not take any shortcuts. Or if we take some risk, we do it with our eyes wide open, and everybody is aware about it. The organization is aware about it. The board is aware about it, and we don't do it blindsided. So, and as you said, this really gave me that skill throughout my career, and I have a pretty versatile experience. I was in manufacturing, in chemical industry, then in pharma. Then as you said, I had like some business leadership role, and this learning agility, I think, really came from these years at GE. Yeah,
that's fascinating. And you've also had a pretty broad swath of experience in terms of the modalities that you've worked on over the years, the different drug products and projects that you've worked on over the years. And it seems like when we'll get into Sensorion's pipeline and its approach. As I reviewed that, it occurred to me that diverse array of experiences that you brought from all those previous companies probably serves you well within this very specific company, because you do tackle hearing related disorders via multiple approaches and modalities. So tell us a little bit about that. Like when you think about the sort of upbringing through Shire and Bexalta and so on, working on things from biosimilars to hemophilia to rare genetic disease. How does that all kind of serve you well now in this role at Sensorion?
Yeah. So as I was mentioning, for CEO, you're managing a cross-functional team trying to execute a strategy that you have defined. So the diversity of experiences I had probably prepared me well for this. But I think beyond that, the fact that I worked mostly in rare disease was, I think, also quite instrumental in being inspired of joining Sensorion. And what I mean with that is, if you look at hearing today, for people who are suffering from hearing loss, there is no drug that has been approved. So people who suffer from moderate hearing loss, we will actually suggest to use hearing aids. For the most severe actually patients, it's cochlear implants. So it's a medtech play. So it's mainly dominated by medical devices. And what we are trying to do, like develop drugs to treat hearing loss after it happened, to prevent hearing loss in situations where we know it can happen, or to restore hearing using gene therapy. Beyond, I would say, the miracle of developing a drug that will successfully pass, I would say, the FDA and EMA requirements, you need to transform the standard of care. You need to make sure, that the ENTs of today come with you all along, and they are part of the journey of developing hearing care. Because when you do that, once you start getting into the clinic, it's almost too late, because the barrier to jump is actually too high. So, and this, I learned it, in rare disease, because in rare disease, actually, obviously, this is rare. So most of the time, actually, most of the doctors have not seen even like a patient, suffering from some of the rare disease I had the privilege to work into. And how we built the community, how we, worked with the patient advocacy group, with the medical societies, to shape the treatment guidelines, how we made sure, to start natural prospective histories so that the doctors actually can start really early on being educating on the treatments we were developing, enabled the successful transformation of the standard of care. And this was actually from day one, that's something I've really brought, into this biotech. They were not really thinking about it that way. They were really thinking, okay, if you develop a drug that works, then that's fine. Everybody will prescribe it. Well, not really. Transforming actually standard of care, transforming habits of surgeons, who used to implant. That's not something that will happen overnight. And we need to make sure we prepare that very, very early on.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to take a step back. You're doing a good job moving into, the therapeutic areas that you address. And I want to go there next, but I want to just take a little step backwards. And I want to get some perspective on when Sensorion set out on its mission, when perhaps give me the, sort of the chronology of your arrival on the scene. But what was the thought process around the the indication that you chose to address? Because we need a little bit of color there, because, to the casual listener, you say, well, we want to address hearing loss, and we want to address it in a way, and we'll get into this, the prevent, treat, restore. Well, that's like swallowing the ocean, right? That's a pretty broad, there are so many different causes, there are so many different issues. Like what was the thought process around what we're going to tackle and how we're going to start? Because it seems like a very mighty swing for a small biotech to take.
It is true. That's a fair assessment. So when I first joined Sensorion, as you said, when I started educating myself about all the root causes, and even like how today it is, how do we actually handle patients today? At Sensorion, when I joined it, what we were doing at that point when I joined it, was like taking drugs that work in over indications, test them in our preclinical platform, and see if it would work in hearing loss actually indications. So it was interesting, but I felt, we had to do something better than that, which was like, as you said, what are the biggest root causes for hearing loss? And if you look at it, 50% actually are genetic. And we were not present at all. We were just handling actually the treatment of hearing loss. And the other 50% is what we call either environmental causes, so aging, noise. Noise is probably actually the biggest cause for hearing loss in the way we live today. And then it's what we call idiopathic. So it's not really understood why people lose their hearing.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, we tried to tackle the treatment and probably on the noise-induced hearing loss, but what about the 50% of genetic causes? And also when I did my homework, I found out that one of the biggest academic institutions driving the science of hearing was Institut Pasteur, French institutions. And they were the ones who identified the first genes causing deafness, and they were working on some gene therapy. So little by little, discussing with my team, like I said, I think we need to revamp our pipeline. As you said, if we want to be a credible player, starting within our scope of responsibility, we should at least explore the ability to work in gene therapy. It was not an easy ride. People thought I was crazy, that it was already difficult enough, to do small molecule. But I had this strong conviction that we had to be present in gene therapy. We had to be, and partly because the science was ready. The data, the animal data were so inspiring, what was published. And I was like, and this is down the road. The guys are in Paris. We should talk to them. So eventually the board followed, the recommendation that we made, and we raised money to start that journey and strengthen the team. So as you said, it started from the patient, like what were the biggest causes, and from there, like what did we have, what we did not have. And I built that conviction that we had to fill in the gaps with gene therapies, particularly leveraging that great opportunity of having a strong academic institutions down the road for Sensorion. So I was like, at least we need to engage the dialogue with them and see if we can partner together.
Yeah. So you sort of let the therapeutic approach follow the patient need. And was it difficult to, you alluded to, the leap from small molecule to gene therapy? Was that a difficult sell to maybe certain stakeholders?
It was a difficult sell, even within the R&D organization at Sensorion. It was at the beginning, even for my board, because obviously they were like, well, the level of capital commitment, that would be required is not the same compared to small molecule. But when I was testing the idea, with investors, sophisticated investors, they were really attracted by the idea of having actually a pipeline of gene therapy. So I was somewhat lucky also that the momentum was like the market like gene therapy. We had these gene therapy programs, available within Institut Pasteur. I built a strong relationship, and then eventually the board was like, we should go for it, see if we can raise the capital to do that.
Yeah. So what does that look like in practice? Try to give me some sense for like in a multimodal, like the treat, repair, restore approach. Like I like that makes perfect sense. But then when you get into the reality of it and you acknowledge that you've got everything from small molecule to gene therapy, you as a leader, you got buy-in, we like the holistic approach, but you as a leader have to then go, okay, now I need to accommodate the capabilities, right? Like developing small molecules and pushing them through the clinic and into commercialization is quite a bit different a journey than doing that with cell therapies or gene therapies. I'm sorry. So just give us a sense for what you've had to do as the leader of the company to accommodate the embrace and development of these multiple modalities within that beautiful holistic umbrella at Sensorion.
You are so right. When we decided actually to embark into that journey of gene therapy, what we said was like, we're not going to start improvising in gene therapy. And at that point at Sensorion, we were 12 people, mainly actually scientists, experienced in preclinical and small molecules, the whole CMC piece and clinical piece, we were working through CROs and CDMOs. So once we successfully raised the capital to actually start the journey in gene therapy, the first thing we did is like we strengthened the board of directors with experienced people in gene therapy. And we hired John Free, who was the chief operating officer of Spark Therapeutics, first company who got actually gene therapy approved by the FDA. So we started by the board. We said, okay, the board will have to also be educated on gene therapy. And then the first 3 hires I made was like I changed the chief medical officer. We brought in actually someone who has deep experience in rare disease and in gene therapy in particular. Then in CMC, we decided actually to build internally the process development and analytical development for gene therapy, because gene therapy, it's not like small molecule. The process is the product. You need to have it in your hands. That was something where thankfully the investors bought that idea and they were ready to allocate capital to do that. And then the third one is in the preclinical science part. We brought in actually AAV experts, promoter experts, etc. And now we are 50 people. So we moved from 12 to 50, and most of the growth was driven actually by the gene therapy new pillar, the restore pillar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, congratulations on that growth. What was the time frame on that roughly?
2019 we started. So from a blank sheet of paper. So it's 3 years.
That's very cool. I want to I want to again back up real quick because I feel like I may have given short shrift to the umbrella approach, right? Like, and how that aligns with the therapeutic effort at Sensorion, like which therapeutic efforts fall under which bucket, right? Restore, treat, prevent. So walk us through that.
You mean like how do we select the indications we're going to pursue?
Yeah, well, so that's another good. Yeah, that's not what I was going for, but it's another good place to start. Another important part of the conversation. I'm looking for sort of a recap of the architecture of Sensorion's approach, and I think the selection of indication within that, within that paradigm makes sense.
Yeah, well, obviously, we built in with what we have, and then we strengthened. So. When we started that journey in gene therapy, we had a small molecule. We still have that small molecule that is called Sens401, and it was investigated for an indication that we call sudden sensory neural hearing loss. So we built from there. And here it's actually people who suffer from hearing loss, and it's a very rapid development of the hearing loss. Within 72 hours, they become completely deaf. And in 60% of the cases, this is irreversible. This is really scary.
And this is that typically noise induced, or is this?
1/3 is noise induced, and 70% actually people don't really know. They would just say, "I woke up like this. I was traveling yesterday. I don't know. I was in a meeting, but then all of a sudden I could not hear anymore."
Wow.
Yeah. So we had this one that was actually finishing. IND enabling studies. We filed actually for an IND, got approval for the IND and for the CTA in Europe. So I had this in hand, and this was like, okay, this is treatment. People suffer from hearing loss. What we are trying to do is to treat their hearing loss so that they can recover some of their hearing. And interestingly enough, the team actually tested that drug in what we call a prevention setting. So we know there are situations where you could actually become deaf. And one of these situations is like for patients suffering from cancer during chemotherapy, we know that 90% of the kids will end up with very severe hearing loss at the end of the chemotherapy, and it's around 60 to 70% of the adults. So we were like, okay, can we prevent that hearing loss? And we tested it in the animal models, and we generated actually very compelling data. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. Prevention, we move from treatment to prevention of hearing loss. And this is when cochlear, I was speaking, about how today we treat patients who are suffering from very severe profound deafness. It's with a cochlear implant. Mm-hmm. So you actually introduce an electrode within the inner ear, you stimulate the neurons within 22 frequencies, and people can acquire the language thanks to that. Maybe a word about the inner ear, because we've not discussed it, but it's like a jewel. I love this organ. I didn't know about this organ before joining, but it's very small. It's not very easy to access. And we have a very limited number of sensory hair cells when we are born. We have only 3,500 inner hair cells, and every single one of them is tuned to a specific frequency. It's like a piano. And once you lose the cell, actually you lose the function. That's the only cells that do not regenerate in the body. So it's a capital that you need to preserve as much as you can.
Yeah.
And because these cells, they are not that many and they are really fragile in some way.
Mm. It begs the question. I could go down a rabbit hole right now, Nawal. It begs the question why. I like to think about evolution, right? I like to think about the way that we're built and the way that we restore ourselves and self-preserve. And those points you just brought up beg the question, why? Like, what did we miss? What did we miss there?
That's a very good question. And it's funny because I had actually that deep conversation when I was traveling with a KOL to a congress like 2 weeks ago. And I was like, how come compared to animals, actually the humans, we could not regenerate the sensory health cells? And he gave me his hypothesis. So we're speaking hypothesis.
Sure. Yeah. I'm not asking you for a concrete answer.
Yeah.
But just a
So what he said is like over the evolution. So for example, he said for animals, what's very important is actually to be able to hear a broad actually range of frequencies, but we don't need to be very acute in the hearing. It's good enough for their ability actually to survive. And his hypothesis is that for the human beings, actually having that strong sense of acuity and being actually very sophisticated, like one cell, one frequency, was very important for our evolution, because what actually you may have read of Homo Deus, like what Homo sapiens, like what made us Homo sapiens is the ability to communicate. Mm-hmm. And communication, actually the foundation is hearing. If you can't hear anymore, it's difficult to communicate. We have seen it. I have actually a quote from an artist who she suffers from Usher syndrome. I don't know if you're aware of that disease. It's a very severe disease. Actually, for the most severe, the babies are born bilaterally deaf, and then they become blind, and then they have very serious balance issues. So you can imagine these kids, they are blind, deaf, and they can't really walk. And the way they communicate is like by touching. So they have translators with touching. Mm. And this artist, she suffered a progressive form of that. And she said, when I became blind, it removed me from things. But when I became deaf, it removed me from people. Mm. Because then she could not have actually a conversation. And I don't know, maybe you have someone, from your family, elderly, who is suffering from hearing loss. And you see that during, maybe dinners, family dinners, they remove themselves because they can't follow. They ask you to repeat. You repeat once, you repeat twice, and then they just say, yeah, I got it. But not really. And it's becoming really difficult for them to engage because the mental charge it requires is too much.
Yeah.
So and that's his hypothesis, that for Homo sapiens to actually being able to be at the top of the food chain, we had to develop the communication, and we had to have like very sophisticated inner ear. So he believes that if we are able to regenerate, then we will lose actually some of the sophistication of the acuity of the frequencies that enables us to enjoy music, to have a conversations, you and I, that you can recognize my voice, that you can actually have spatial orientation, where the noise is coming from, etc.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It is, it's like, wow, I didn't know about that. But
when you're striving to excel in a new arena, the best guides are the ones already doing it well. The Business of Biotech brings those voices forward to help new and emerging biopharmas turn their innovations, like mRNA and cell and gene therapies, into clinical realities. Tune in and subscribe for insights on hiring, regulatory, and other need-to-know topics for biopharma leaders. The podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. Getting back to your therapeutic approach, it's fascinating, but it makes it a more sophisticated fix, right? Like, I mean, it's got to add layers of complexity and sophistication to the repair.
Absolutely, because with Restore, what we are trying to do, as you said, is like you're missing a protein, we're giving you back the protein with the gene therapy. And we would like to actually re-express the protein in the 3,500 hair cells. That's actually what success looks like, okay? We know that actually if you only successfully transfuse 20% of them, you will restore hearing, normal hearing, because probably I have only 50% of my cells that now are functioning just because of the noise and the aging and all of that. And when you think about the cochlear implants, which is the standard of care for baby who is born deaf, you may have seen, these kids with a battery on their skull, and they have an electrode being introduced. They have only 22 frequencies. So they all hear somewhat the same sound. They can't really enjoy music. They can't really play music, but sometimes it's enough for them to acquire the language. It's not always good enough for them to go to normal school because still, they have a lot of difficulties in a noisy environment to actually then capture what the teacher is saying. So, and what we are trying to do is make these cochlear implants completely irrelevant and restore normal hearing for these kids so that they can acquire the language, go to normal school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly admirable work. And also, like I said, just a great big giant swing with all sorts of all sorts of potential for the therapeutics. If you think of it in terms of a market opportunity, is there anything that's off the table related to hearing loss or sensory issues?
You mean off the table for us right now to consider?
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a pretty holistic approach to address. I don't know. I'm not sure what the continuum looks like in terms of hearing loss disorders, but it sounds like you're addressing some pretty significant ones. Are there hearing issues that are not on your radar right now?
The ones that actually is on our radar, but as you said, that will be a long shot. But we think that the science will continue to mature, is this ability to restore the cells.
Mm-hmm.
So it's to regenerate the sensory hair cells and make sure that these cells are connected to the right frequency. This is the holy grail. Because then, aging, actually, anyone could potentially have a drug that could regenerate the sensory hair cells after maybe the veterans, from the military. Noise-induced hearing loss is a big issue for them because actually they have to retire early, the professional soldiers, and it's impacting obviously the life of this man. We were invited by the U.S. Department of Defense to actually present our work, and they were really interested because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So the musicians actually, what you see is that unfortunately they have a slope of a very severe hearing loss very faster than the normal population because they constantly expose, to 80, 90 decibel, and it's their work, right? So the holy grail that would be regeneration, the animals, like the birds and
On that restoration front, it wasn't too long ago that Sensorion received some good news, some shots in the arm. You got FDA rare pediatric disease and orphan drug designations for OTOF-GT. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. Give us some insight into how you secured those designations and what they will mean for your go forward plan.
Right. So when we started actually our journey in gene therapy, that started with a relationship with Institut Pasteur. I mentioned them. Mm-hmm. And they first focused on this indication that we call ototoxicity deficiency. So in this case, the babies are born bilaterally deaf. So because they're suffering from a defective gene and they're not expressing this protein that is called ototoxicity. And it's like they have a frozen system. We don't see actually any evidence of degeneration. So Pasteur thought, and actually everyone else, that it's the perfect indication to start the gene therapy and demonstrate that gene therapy works for the inner ear. So it's a rare disease. The prevalence, so there are around 20,000 children today who are actually suffering from ototoxicity deficiency in the US and in Europe. And there are around 1,100 new births every year who are suffering from that specific. So obviously this is rare. So there exist actually incentives to incentivize companies to even focus on these small and rare pediatric indications. So we submitted our file based on the epidemiology data and based on the proof of concept data we have. And the US FDA considered, yes, we agree with you that it's very rare. And yes, we agree that you have something that it looks interesting. So the orphan drug designation will give us, everybody knows, the exclusivity for a certain amount of years in the US, and the rare pediatric voucher. So it's eligibility. So we have to get US FDA approval within a certain time frame. And this can be a voucher for another drug to actually secure additional exclusivity for 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Has that, is there, when you receive those designations, does it create sort of an immediate acceleration or boost? Like, I'm just curious, like what the immediate or short-term impact is on the company.
On the company, obviously, we feel very proud, and we know that it will create a pathway that will help us build more bridges with the regulatory agencies. So obviously, that's really helpful, particularly in a field where even the regulatory agencies are learning, because even for them, it's like, okay, what's the right primary endpoint to approve a drug to restore hearing or to treat hearing loss? So that's great news. Obviously, the board likes to have this, and it's helpful, for potential business development discussions or to raise capital.
Yeah. When you look forward, like when you kind of take the leap into like what this might look like in a commercial and approved setting, give us a sense for what the manufacturing environment might look like, manufacturing and distribution of the therapy. This is a question I like to ask around cell and gene therapies in particular, because there isn't necessarily a standard, as opposed to like monoclonal antibodies or vaccines. There's not like a standard manufacturing administration approach right now, and this is a unique indication, right? Like we spent a lot of time talking about oncology and viruses and that kind of thing. This is a unique indication for me, so I'm just curious what that picture might look like in a manufacturing and distribution environment, ideally. And I realize that it's kind of forward looking, right? Like, things could change, but just curious what your take is.
Yeah, so actually what we will do is like we will inject the inner ear, the drug. It's going to be in a vial. It will be reconstituted in the pharmacy. So what will happen is that we will have contract with the hospital, university hospitals, most probably actually the ones who today implant the children who are born deaf. That could be the same centers of excellence, probably the same surgeons. So instead of implanting the child, they will be actually injecting the gene therapy. So we will actually supply vials that will be frozen and that will have to be kept frozen. And in the hospitals, the pharmacy hospitals, they will reconstitute and then the surgeon will inject. So it's in terms of distribution and supply, I think the biggest challenge is to keep the cold temperature. Mm-hmm. But it's not like, for example, like CAR-T, where you have that specific time frame, you have the unicity of the patient donor, you need to manufacture this. It's not going to be like that.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit ago the paradigm, the process is the product is the process, right? So what does that mean for Sensorion in terms of internal control and I guess of the candidate as you approach and move into a commercial stage? Will you maintain that? Will it be something that Sensorion is manufacturing in-house and handling kind of cradle to grave?
So today what we're doing is like we're developing the process internally up to actually what we consider large scale. And then we do the tech transfer to a GMP approved manufacturer. Mm-hmm. So we haven't built actually the GMP manufacturing for that. Let's see if it's going to happen in the future. If we have a pipeline of gene therapy programs, then at that point, we can probably justify the investment. So we have bioreactors up to 50 liters, which probably in Europe, we're probably one of the rare actually gene therapy companies that have invested in this medium capacity. And we also developing the analytical internally, and then we do the tech transfer at the CDMO. So somewhat, as you said, we are the first one to develop the process. We know the product very well. We know how to characterize the product. And then we are actually almost the opinion leaders or the experts then teaching the CDMO. And it was a very deliberate decision, because we did not want to be only in the hands of the CDMO when you have regulatory interactions. Also, to try to improve productivity and just wait for them to do the testing or respond to the questions that the regulatory agencies are going to ask. So that's how we work today.
Yeah. Like I said, I know it was a forward-looking question, so there's no one's going to hold you to it, right? But what is, if you think about Sensorion from the time you joined it to where you are now, and again looking forward, what's the end game? Like, is it your desire? Is it Nawal's desire to take this company to commercial and beyond? Is it is it going to be in the company's best interest to kind of partner things out, look for an acquisition? I mean, obviously, again, not going to hold you to anything, but I'm just wondering, like, what the intent is. Remain a development company, become the leader in commercial stage hearing loss therapeutics. What's your vision?
Yeah, my personal ambition is like to bring the first gene therapy to the market. So that,
all right, you're telling me take a step back, Matt. One step at a time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, because I will respond actually with several caveats. That would be a personal satisfaction, because I would think like we started from nothing, and eventually, we have the miracle that happened. The FDA and EMA approved this, and we have children, being injected and they can hear again.
Yeah.
There is no month, Matt, where we don't receive actually an email from parents that are asking us, our child just got diagnosed, with deafness. They didn't know that they were carrying the recessive gene. They have to take the decision, like, what are we going to do? If we're implanting, obviously, then by destroying some of the sensory hair cells, then gene therapy is not an option for these children. And it's devastating, because you're just referring them to the key opinion leaders, within their region to try to take that decision. And I know that this will make a positive impact. Then if I'm really realistic, and coming from my experience, from big pharma and building rare disease franchises, I wish I could be Henry Carmier and like build Genzyme, the Genzyme of the hearing space. Yeah. That would be beautiful. But I do believe that probably having a partnership with a company that has the appetite of hearing space and using their muscle to deploy what we've done successfully in Europe, in the US, and in Japan, so that we can really have true global reach. So I do believe that this will be important, and particularly with companies who know how to transform standard of care, starting from nothing to with all the steps that I mentioned, working with the patient advocacy group, working with the medical society, so that diagnosis cycle is being set up. How do we diagnose for this disease? Shape, the endpoints, make sure, that we work with the regulatory agencies the right way, make sure we have global scale, make sure also we are responsible of the pricing of the gene therapy. I do believe that gene therapy in the inner ear can be responsibly priced because it's a small organ. We don't need high doses. It's a small volume, very limited number of sensory cells to be transduced. It's not like the muscle disorders or the liver disorders where they have to maintain, a certain dose for a very long period of time. The fact that the cells do not regenerate is actually an upside for gene therapy.
Yeah. What do you, at this stage in the game, like today, like when we get off this interview and you go back to your desk and you're back to your day job, which of those you just rattle off your regulatory pricing, like some of the challenges in the space, and maybe at this point in the development process, it's still a scientific challenge, perhaps, that is being overcome. But what is it today? Like what's number one kind of standing in the way of your next step? Maybe not standing in the way, maybe not even standing in the way, but maybe a high hurdle that needs to be cleared.
Not standing in the way, as you said, but like a hard hurdle to because it's a rare disease, and because today the genotyping is not systematic, the successful, timely enrollment of the clinical trials will be important.
Yeah,
and that's the reason why, since 2019, we started these prospective natural histories all across Europe. So we've been working with 10 centers where they work together in designing actually the diagnosis protocol, and they're involving babies who have been diagnosed with ototoxicity or GJB2, which is the second program we are interested into. And then the doctors explain to the parents why we're doing this, and the parents get educated on gene therapy. So that's what I was mentioning, like educating really early on. We'll get in the clinic in 2023. We've been doing this for the past 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
But this, we did it well in Europe. In the US, we'll have actually to start maybe 1 year before the clinical trial. So it's going to be a bigger hurdle.
How quickly is that the genotyping paradigm improving? How quickly is that getting better?
It can be pretty fast. My experience in rare disease is like once you have successfully demonstrated efficacy at the end of your phase 2, you can start working with the medical societies that will shape guidelines and then mandate the diagnosis, at screening during actually newborn screening, and then because there is a gene therapy that is being developed for that, we will be genotyping, because if the child is suffering from that, maybe gene therapy is a good option for them.
Yeah.
Today, there is no gene therapy. It's cochlear implants. It works whatever the mutation. So it's not done in a systematic manner, and parents are not necessarily asking for it. So.
Yeah. So some success definitely breeds interest in pushing that genotyping activity, right? Like that, pushing that forward, which is a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I've been bouncing all over the place on this interview, and I appreciate your patience as I bounced around. And we are running short on time, but I want to go back to the overall pipeline and make sure that, like, as far as clinical updates, if there are any other, we'd spent a lot of time talking about the gene therapy. If there are any other sort of clinical updates on other candidates that you wanted to share that kind of dovetail?
Yeah, it's true that we spoke about the gene therapy that looks like the favorite children, but not
well, it fits. We focus on biologics sort of as a matter of course, but obviously when there's, when I've got a guest on like you who has a multimodal approach that approaches that complement one another, I'm not going to take small molecule off the table. So I certainly want to give you an opportunity to.
Well, the most advanced actually compound is a small molecule. That's the Sensorion one, as I said, and it's currently being investigated in phase 2A proof of concept. So we are enrolling patients as we speak. The two indications we are working on, the first one is actually in collaboration with Cochlear. They are the global leaders for cochlear implants, as I was mentioning that. And the focus is adults who could be candidates for cochlear implants. And these adults, they have residual hearing, contrary to the babies who are born deaf, who are profoundly deaf. They don't have any residual hearing. Mm-hmm. And they have actually difficulties to penetrate this market because after the surgery, most of the patients will suffer a hearing loss, which is very counterintuitive. You're trying to solve for hearing loss, but the surgery, the introduction of the electrode in this delicate organ will induce actually some mechanical damage of the hair cells, some inflammation that may trigger.
Noel, I think you froze up. We're gonna freeze up, Annie. Oh, Noel, you froze up there for a second.
I did freeze. When did I start speaking to myself?
I think it was right after you had talked about
the adults.
Start talking about adults with gradual hearing loss as opposed to babies who have complete hearing loss, and then you were going.
Yeah, so what the reason we're working with Cochlear is that they would like to penetrate the adult market adults who have residual hearing, because unfortunately today, if you look at the hearing outcomes, most of the patients after the surgery will suffer hearing loss. Mm-hmm. It's really due to the introduction of the electrode. This will trigger inflammation, mechanical damage. And in the animal models that we developed together, when we combined Sensorion with their surgery techniques, we preserved the residual hearing in frequencies that are important for speech. So now we are enrolling patients in a proof of concept study, and we are trying to see if maybe 1/3 of the patients will preserve their residual hearing. That would be actually tremendous progress compared to 100% of them suffering from hearing loss. And we'll have data readouts first half of this year. for this first indication. And the next one is actually an indication I mentioned earlier. That's the patients who are suffering from cancer, who are being treated in chemotherapy with cisplatin. And in this case, we are actually treating the patients 1 week before the chemotherapy and throughout the chemotherapy so that we can preserve their hearing. And we know the drug doesn't interfere with the efficacy of cisplatin. And we'll be also disclosing some preliminary data first half of this year. So first half of this year, we'll be actually quite busy with some clinical data readout with our small molecule. And then we'll be filing the clinical trial application for our first gene therapy program. And hopefully we'll be recruiting our first patient before year end.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, it's a bit busy, but important work for sure. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing sort of, like I said, the holistic view. And I appreciate, as I said, your patience with my with my random and bouncing questions. But it is fantastic work, and we'll be paying attention. Hopefully we can have you back on at some point to talk a little bit about some of these clinical trials and the outcomes. And I wish you well. Any parting shots, Nawal, parting advice maybe? Like I look at you and I think here's a young woman who did, quickly achieved a lot in her career in terms of that time at Big Bio and jumped into a position leading an emerging bio company and has done quite well at that. What advice would you have perhaps for other young women who aspire to do what you're doing, or young men for that matter, just in general, folks who are aspiring to achieve some of the same great things that you have?
Yeah, what has helped me actually tremendously in my career, and that may be an advice that will work for others as well, is the opportunity to take actually very diverse role, and not necessarily just like actually moving up the ladder, but also like going lateral, because at a certain point, actually, that when you put yourself out of your comfort zone in as you said, a new modality, a new function, a new country, that learning agility muscle that you are developing, I think, is one of the biggest predictor of success for the future. And because then you learn, actually how to work obviously hard, ask the right questions, and then all of a sudden it's like you're becoming a more well-rounded leader. Mm-hmm. Instead of building, just a vertical of strength, but then maybe you have a lot of blindsided things. So that's what I would recommend to people. Just take, the roles that you think are really risky. Take the roles that maybe is natural even, and it's going to pay off. And I would also recommend people to go abroad. For Europeans to go to the US, for American folks to go to Europe, because I think, people who have been successful in a job in a foreign country, having to deal with the change in language and the change of culture, I think it tells a lot about the person you are becoming throughout, that process.
Yeah. Fantastic advice. Yeah. That's one I hadn't heard before. I like it. Good stuff. All right. Well, we're going to let you go for now, Nawal. Thank you again for joining me. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks for the opportunity. We'll talk to you again soon.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. I'm looking forward to re-engaging. Bye-bye.
So that's Sensorion CEO and Director Nawal Ouzren. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva, which demonstrates its commitment to the leaders of emerging biopharma companies at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. Go to bioprocessonline.com/BOB to subscribe to our new Business of Biotech newsletter. If you're enjoying interviews like this with Nawal Ouzren, tell your friends and colleagues about it. Leave us a rating and some feedback. And as always, thanks for listening.